Rabia al al-Qaysiyya was an Arab poetess, Sufi saint and Sufi mystic, and influential religious figure during the 8th century in modern-day southern Iraq. Rabia is sometimes referred to as Rabi'a Al-Baṣriya, as she was born in Basra in the 2nd decade of the early 8th century. And by the way, her first name, Rabia, means literally fourth, as she was the 4th daughter when she was born. And when she was born to have poor family, but also a very devout and proud family that did not want to ask for help, as they did not want to rely upon anyone except God's grace. According to famous medieval Sufi poet Farid ad-Din Attar, it is said that at night the prophet should have appeared to her father in a dream and told him, "Your newly born daughter is a favorite of the Lord and shall lead many Muslims to the right path. You should approach the Amir of Basra and present him with a letter in which should be written this message. You offer prayer to the Holy Prophet 100 times every night and 400 times every Thursday night. However, since you failed to observe the rule last Thursday, as a penalty, you must pay the bearer 400 dinars." And apparently it worked. The Amir paid them the sum of 400 dinars, which was quite a sum at that time. And the family managed to survive despite Rabia being born and straining their economy. Now, how truthful this story really is could very well be debated, as it is rather a saintly miracle rather than a historical fact. A story made to establish her sainthood and piety. But I would still argue that stories like these are still quite interesting as a social phenomenon, and similar miracles were attributed to her also later in her life. As later in life, she was sold into slavery due to being captured by raiders, or she was forced into it due to other reasons, or maybe even born into it. Yet, what is told about her is that she was freed by her master. A tale claims that this was due to the master's fear when he saw her surrounded by light, surrounding her, protecting her, and seeing something that holy and beautiful around her. Her master offered marriage instantly, but Rabia declined, answering that she wanted to devote herself to God only and to no man. After this other mythical story about her saintly piety, she is associated in legends with the famous Sufi master Hasan al-Basri as his pupil, though this is not that likely, since he died in 728 when she was possibly still a child and would probably not have considered her as a worthy pupil, though the earliest placements of her birth do make her a teenager, and thus grown enough by most standards of that time to be considered an adult in certain ways, but still doubtful that such a young woman would have been taken up by a Sufi like Hasan al-Basri as a pupil. Anyway, later Rabia went into the desert to pray and became an ascetic, living far away from civilization, living a life of semi-seclusion. She is often cited as being the queen of saintly women due to her extreme acts of piety and love for God. And according to legend, when asked why she performed 1,000 ritual prostrations, both during the day and at night, she answered, "I desire no reward for it. I do it so that the messenger of God, may God bless him and give him peace, will delight in it on the day of resurrection, and say to the prophets, 'Take note of what a woman of my community has accomplished.'" Rabia would stay many years in the desert, alone, often starving herself, and it is claimed that it was only her faith that was her nourishment. She was in complete solitude, praying and writing poetry, and only occasionally visiting the cities in Iraq, often in order to give away her poetry praising God. Poetry that would spread far and wide and gain her lots of fame, though she would still stay in the desert most of the time. And it was not until late in life, when she was 40 years old, that she returned to Basra and also got a circle of disciples around her. People having heard about her piety and the spread of her beautiful poetry praising God, having attracted lots of admirers. With a circle of disciples around her, she would teach her doctrine of divine love, known as al-ishq al-haqiqi, the genuine love for God and His goodness. I want to put out the fires of hell and burn down the rewards of paradise. They block the way to God. I do not want to worship from fear of punishment or for the promise of reward, but simply for the love of God. This was her statement when she was asked why she was running around on the town square with a bucket of water in one hand and a pot of fire in the other, as a symbolic gesture. And this was what she taught her disciples, and what she would continue to teach people that would come from far and wide in order to learn from her, even according to certain stories, having been invited into the caliphal court to recite her poetry and to discuss her views, though she apparently refused this, saying that if the caliph wanted to know about her, he would need to get to her, which some of the stories actually continue with claiming that the caliph actually did visit her. In any case, Rabi'a would continue her role as a great Sufi teacher, teaching her doctrine of divine love until she died around the age of 80 in Basra, childless due to a life of celibate piety dedicated to the praising of the love of God. And today she remains a famous female Sufi saint, probably the most famous of the Abbasid Golden Age, and as an icon of female Sufi piety within Islam, to the extent that mosques and city plazas have been named after her and films have been made about her, and her poetry and writings are praised by later poets and writers such as Farid ad-Din Attar during the medieval period, and also modern writers such as the Lebanese feminist writer Widad al-Sakakini and the existentialist philosopher al-Rahman al-Badawi, showing that she has had quite an extensive legacy. Though it should be said that there are almost no manuscripts or writings by or about Rabia during her lifetime or close to her lifetime. And while there are various poems and pieces of writing that are attributed to her, said to be from her, the legitimacy of these can be debated, as they are usually referred to in later works by other later writers. Thus, when we talk about her life, we must rely on the literature of people that came often hundreds of years after her time and who wrote about her legacy and claimed that this was her poetry or her statements or her acts. And it does not help that a lot of these tales contradict each other and are usually fantastical in nature, and literature includes a lot of miracles which lie outside of normal modern historical analysis as being true events, and complicates the reliability of these sources when they make these statements. Yet, even if specific miracles might not have happened, it is possible and even likely that she existed, as many people and groups actually do cite her and used her as a source of inspiration, or at least stated that they did, and also cite similar types of poetry. And she is not unlikely to have existed or been an important person where she were, considering the context she lived in. And that is my next part of this video, which is the context. In order to understand Rabia, we need to understand that she acted in the shadow of the rise of the Abbasids during the Abbasid revolution, where they took over from the Umayyads before that had ruled in the Middle East. And this meant a lot of political changes, and also, as the caliphates were the successors of Muhammad and claimed the legitimacy of being the leaders of the Muslim world, there also came a lot of religious changes due to this change in power. And Basra, together with the cities of Kufa and Baghdad, became centers in this period of religious change and new religious thinking that happened due to this political change in 750 with the Abbasid revolution. And this is just at a time when Rabia is returning from her asceticism in the desert. And she also lived during the beginning of the rise of Sufism and the codification of it into a lot of recurring practices and fundamental ideas that are used by a lot of Sufi groups even to this day. And it is likely that Rabia encountered these Sufi groups in Basra and learned from them and tried to live as these early Sufi groups did and was inspired by them to act as she did. So Rabia is part of a greater tendency towards Islamic mysticism during this age, in an age where things are changing rapidly. In addition, she was also considered a very skilled poetess, and historically, throughout much of the Middle Ages, Arabic women through Arabic poetry have been unparalleled in visibility and impact, as poetry played a very special role in the medieval Arabic world and arguably still plays a very special role in Arabic society. Being a poet meant that you could actually do a lot and write a lot that was usually outside of the bounds of society and transgressive against the norms, because it was an allowed form to express that, which was, together with the fact that Basra was an economical, cultural and intellectual center at this time, made it so that Rabi'a's poetry could spread despite her being a woman, and her poetry and later teachings including a lot of ideas that could be seen as extremely radical when it came to Islam, such as denying the importance of hell and heaven in favor of a pure focus on love to God. But in any case, her poetry, and possibly also her radicalism in her teachings, did attract a lot of disciples. And it should also be remembered that she was a lot older as a woman when she got her disciples later in life. An older woman that had went through menopause was considered a different category of woman, and not that different from men in stature during this era in Abbasid Iraq. With this context in mind, Rabi'a's rise to fame as a Sufi teacher and poetess is not that out of the bounds, and with this fame and through her followers she would teach her doctrine regarding the love of God as exemplified in this piece of poetry. أحبك حبين حب الهوى وحبا لأنك أهل لذاك فأما الذي هو حب الهوى فشغلي بذكرك عن من سواك وأما الذي أنت أهل له فكشفك لي الحجب حتى أراك فلا الحمد فدا ولا ذاك لي ولكن لك الحمد فدا وذاك. I love you, twice the love of passion. I love you because you are deserving of that. And as for that, which is the love of passion, my struggle is with the mentioning of you, away from wherever is, except you. Your revealing of the veil for me is so that I may see you. And so, the praise is not in this or that for me, but for you, the praise is in this and that. And with this piece of poetry demonstrating Rabi'a's love for God, I will end this video. I hope you liked it, both the poetry and the video about Rabia, the great Sufi poetess. Please do subscribe, as it would help the channel spread awareness about the humanities. اشتركوا بالقناة من فضلكم.